Part 25. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 241. Gu Mingde also didn't expect that this silly boy, who said he was in awe of the imperial power, actually did things with no awe at all. What's the difference between him openly talking about the introduction and directly exposing the emperor's whereabouts? Gu Mingde was only moved for a second. Showing his face in front of the emperor in advance was indeed helpful to his career, but it was most likely to backfire. Master, thank you for your kindness, but there is no need for it. Your Majesty's private visit in disguise is to avoid other people. He must not be in the mood to see anyone. If I am willing, I can always see him when I take part in the palace examination in the future. Shen Changfeng sighed and said, since Master wants to rely on his true ability, then I won't do such unnecessary things. Because he knew that the emperor loved to go to Baiyun Temple, Gu Mingde couldn't take everyone there anymore. After sending Gu Zhao back to Daryan, Gu Mingde took the children back. Sitting on the carriage returning, Niu couldn't help but ask. Brother Shen, what does the emperor look like? My grandma said that he has 3 heads and 6 arms. He is like a god. He usually eats from a golden rice bowl. He has a lot of people waiting on him and has thousands of empresses in his harem. Is that true? Shen Changfeng was drinking water. When he heard this, he immediately choked on the water. How can there be someone with 3 heads and 6 arms? That's not a god, that's a monster, my dear, don't say this nonsense, Shen Changfeng said. Niu nodded, but she was still a little disappointed. Why is the emperor just like us ordinary people? He's not that powerful. Shen Changfeng reasoned again, good boy, you can't say this out loud, do you understand? Niu continued to nod, I know, you can't speak ill of anyone outside, I understand, but brother Shen, you are not an outsider. Shen Changfeng was inevitably coaxed by these words. The emperor's power does not lie in his appearance, but in the power in his hands, Gu Mingde said. Niu turned around and asked, Dad, what is power? Shen Changfeng also listened carefully to Gu Mingde's explanation. Gu Mingde said, your mother and I don't let you eat sweets, you must obey. This is our right as parents. The emperor's power is that he can command everyone in the world to obey him and act according to his ideas. He can dominate everyone, so he is the most powerful person in the world. When Niu heard this, her eyes widened and she asked, he can take away the food from my hand. I can't resist. Gu Mingde touched the little girl's head and said, he does have such an ability, but he probably won't do this. The little girl immediately felt relieved and asked again, I really want to eat sweets, but you won't let me eat them, but I know in my heart that you are doing this for my own good. The emperor uses his power for the benefit of others, okay. Gu Mingde did not expect that his daughter would be so sharp and be able to draw inferences from one instance to another in a short period of time. The emperor is the master of the people in the world, and he also bears the important responsibility of taking care of the people in the world, so when he uses his power, he should do it for the good of others, Gu Mingde said. Did our emperor do this? Niu asked again. After Gu Mingde hesitated for a moment, he finally nodded. Niu looked relieved, that's good. If that's the case, I would also like to have such a master. Gu Mingde sighed. Theory is theory, reality is reality. The emperor is a man who loves the people and works hard, but even so, many people are still in dire straits. The carriage suddenly stopped. What's wrong? Gu Mingde asked Qi Dashan, who was driving the car. Master, there is a carriage in front that has broken down and is parked in the middle of the road, blocking the road, Qi Dashan said. Gu Mingde knew that Qi Dashan could repair carriages, so he said, go forward and see if you can help. Qi Dashan jumped off the carriage and walked forward, but did not come back after a long time. The carriage had been parked in place. Niu Niu felt a little bored and couldn't help but lift the curtain and look outside. At a glance, she saw a middle-aged man surrounded by several people on the roadside ahead. "Dad, I saw an acquaintance," Niu Niu said. Gu Mingda's face was full of surprise. "You actually have acquaintances in the capital?" He got off the carriage with Niu Niu in his arms, and Shen Changfeng followed a step behind. "Mr. Big, is your carriage broken down?" Niu Niu asked. Li Yong turned his head when he heard the voice, and when he saw it was Niu Niu, a smile appeared on his face. Although he only met Niu Niu once, he liked her inexplicably. He had recalled her in these days, always thinking that if he had a daughter, she should be as cute as Niu Niu. "Meet you again, little girl, are you with your family?" When Li Yong said this, his eyes fell on Gu Mingda, who was holding Niu Niu. Gu Mingda is handsome and tall. Just standing there makes people feel good about him. Li Yong looked back again, and then he saw an unlucky child, and quietly shook his head towards the unlucky child. Shen Changfeng's eyes widened at this time. He originally wanted to introduce Gu Mingda, but he didn't expect to meet him halfway. It's really hard to say luck. Shen Changfeng could only salute Li Yong from a distance. Seeing that he was unwilling to reveal his identity, he could only cover his mouth. Niu Niu introduced, "This is my dad. Mr. Da, I don't know what to call you yet." When Li Yong heard this, he smiled and said, "It's good to call him Mr. Da. Your father seems to be a scholar." Niu Niu said proudly, "My father is the first place in the provincial examination, he is amazing." Gu Mingda couldn't help but tap Niu Niu's little head gently when he heard this. "You kid, you should be more modest." Niu Niu said, "Dad is already very powerful. I don't need to be modest." Listening to these childish words, Li Yong couldn't help laughing, and he looked at Gu Mingda with envy. With such a lovely daughter, he must have no worries. "Mister, you come to Baiyun Temple again to meet your wife?" Niu Niu asked. Li Yong nodded when he heard this. "There are too many people in Baiyun Temple now, and I may not come here in the future. I hope she can be safe and happy in a place where I can't see her." Li Yong looked lonely. Niu Niu comforted, "I will." Coincidentally, at this time, Chi Das Han finally helped to repair the carriage. "Little girl, I'm going back now. I hope we'll meet again." After saying this, Li Yong nodded to Gu Mingda, turned around and got on the carriage with the help of the servants. Gu Mingda held Niu Niu and turned around and got on his own carriage. Shen Changfeng was about to breathe a sigh of relief, but he didn't expect Gu Mingda to ask directly, "The great gentleman just now is your majesty, right?" After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 242. The doubts on Shen Changfeng's face were about to solidify. He remembered that he was not exposed, so how could Gu Mingda guess so accurately? "Master, how did you see it?" Gu Mingda explained, "Niu Niu just spoke to Mr. Big, and the attendants around him acted in guard mode the moment they heard the voice. These are not ordinary attendants. I also heard Niu Niu mention that Mr. Da went to Baiyun Temple last time, which coincides with His Majesty's frequent visits to Baiyun Temple recently. The most important thing is that I just said it casually, but I didn't expect you to admit it directly. You can actually deny it?" Shen Changfeng. Shen Changfeng touched his nose when he heard this. "I just can't stand fraud." Gu Mingda smiled and said, "The more you are deceived, the more you will remember it." Seeing that they had finished speaking, Niu Niu tilted her head and asked, "How can Mr. Da be the emperor? Doesn't he have a queen?" Shen Changfeng shook his head and said, "Your Majesty ascended the throne at a young age and has not yet had time to marry a wife. Although there are concubines in the harem these years, the middle palace is vacant." Gu Mingda asked again what Niu Niu had said to the emperor last time. "About his wife," Niu Niu said. Gu Mingda immediately said, "Then don't say it." His Majesty probably doesn't like others to talk about his private affairs. Niu Niu nodded in understanding. Gu Mingde turned to Shen Changfeng and said, "Your status is different from others. You are the emperor's nephew, so you must know more than us. Mother should have taught you that the emperor's private affairs should not be spread undisciplined." When Shen Changfeng heard this, he nodded on his face, but felt guilty in his heart. He seemed to be muttering outside. Now that he saw the master telling Niu Niu so seriously, he realized that he should have done something wrong in the past. "Did you write a poem today?" Gu Mingde changed the topic directly. Shen Changfeng hesitated for a moment and said, "I did express my feelings, but I only wrote 2 sentences. I may have to think about it for a while before I can write it all." Gu Mingde didn't push her, but said, "It's good if you have this intention. Take your time and don't be in a hurry." The carriage returned home, but before entering, they met someone from the Sun family on the roadside. The Sun family sent someone to deliver the invitation, not to play somewhere else, but to enter the theater. "Master Gu, this is a play written by my master and his wife. It's okay, so you must appreciate it," the servant explained with a smile. When the Gu family heard about this, they were all surprised. Only Zhang Yuniang and Lu Xiru were happy for Mrs. Li. "On the way to Beijing, I heard that it was going to be written into a storybook. I didn't expect that it would be in the theater so quickly. It shows that she wrote the storybook very well." Niu Niu was also very excited. "Did anyone play the roles of my parents and Aunt Lu? They actually sang about what happened in our family. I wonder if I am included in the play." Gu Mingde touched his daughter's little face and said, "Most likely there won't be you. Children as old as you in the troupe can't even perform on stage." Niu Niu was not discouraged when she heard this and said, "It will be great if you sing our family's story." Gu Mingde guessed that someone might have helped to move into the theater so quickly. The next night, when the Gu family arrived at the entrance of the theater, they saw shopkeeper Luo and Sun Jiaxing. Sun Jiaxing explained softly, "It was originally written as a storybook. After my wife finished writing it, I helped polish it and revise it. After I finished revising it, I still felt unsure, so on the advice of my colleagues in the Hanlin Academy, I asked Mr. Zhan for advice." This Master Zhan was no one else. He was a Hanlin scholar and one of the current assistant ministers of the cabinet. It would be very difficult for others to meet him, but Sun Jiaxing and him were both colleagues of the Hanlin Academy. Mr. Zhan was an old fancier. He also wrote many scripts and opera scripts. He also had a theater at home. He liked Sun Jiaxing's scripts after reading them and suggested that Sun Jiaxing compile the scripts into a play. Today is the first episode of this drama. Sun Jiaxing and Li were very nervous, fearing that the audience would not buy it. At this time, Mrs. Li said to Zhang Yuniang and Lu Xiru, "I'm really afraid that those actors will be kicked off the stage while singing." Lu Xiru consoled her, "It shouldn't be the case, Sister Li, you are overthinking it. A story like Master Zhan that big shots like is definitely not bad. If not, there is still our braised food." Lu Xiru had just learned from shopkeeper Luo that today was the first time for the play to be performed, and it was also a linkage with Lu Mei. The Luo family has now opened a braised food shop in the capital, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Although the braised food shop has prospered with its unique flavor since it opened, it still has not gained popularity. The Luo family still has 2 stores under preparation. Shopkeeper Luo attaches great importance to this rehearsal and goes to the theater to watch in person. He also bought a large number of theater tickets to give to restaurant guests. The play has not yet begun, but at first glance, it is full of guests. After exchanging pleasantries for a while, shopkeeper Luo and Sun Jiaxing continued to welcome guests at the entrance of the theater. Sun Jiaxing also gave a lot of theater tickets to his colleagues in the Hanlin Academy. Because of his generosity, he often invited his colleagues to have dinner with Shang Feng. Now that he has been appreciated by Mr. Zhan, the senior with a tricky personality no longer dares to embarrass him. At this time, in the private room of the theater, Ms. Li was also praising Na Yunio and said to Zhang Yuniang in a low voice, "Na Yunio is really a little lucky star. Once she comes to my house, her godfather can get rid of a bad habit. I really wish that Na Yunio could be with her every day. They all live in my house." After hearing this, Zhang Yuniang immediately said, "Master son, what's wrong with him? He is also a rare good man." Li said, "He used to hold back and not tell me anything, but now that we have talked, he discusses everything with me and is more understanding of my difficulties than before. You know, my mother-in-law always preferred the second and third bedrooms in the past, but this time she wanted to stay in her hometown again. We had only been in Beijing for a few days, and something happened again with the second and third bedrooms. They even went to the Yamen. The old lady then I hurriedly asked someone to send a letter to my husband to help them settle the matter. My husband-in-law was cruel this time. Not only did he not help with the activities, he also wrote a letter back and severely reprimanded his two younger brothers. The Yamen had already received my husband's advice, so naturally they handled the matter impartially. The second and third bedrooms were severely dealt with, and they had to give up most of their family property before they could escape. It's not enough for them to have peace and stability. They still act recklessly and even made my mother-in-law so angry that she had a stroke." Zhang Yuniang was suddenly surprised when she heard this. "How long have you been away from home? Why did the old lady fall ill?" Ms. Li nodded when she heard this, and took out the handkerchief to wipe the non-existent tears from the corner of her eyes. "Yes, how pitiful the god is, the old lady has been worrying about the second and third houses for her whole life, who would have thought that she would be harmed by them again?" Zhang Yuniang asked again, "The old lady has suffered a stroke. Who is taking care of her now? Will she let you go back?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 243. When Li heard this, she didn't look panicked at all, but said, "My hometown did send someone to tell me to go back and take care of the old lady." Zhang Yuniang became a little worried when she heard this. But Li changed the subject and said, "My husband loves me, so he just told my family that I can serve and take care of the old lady, but he asked them to send her here from her hometown. In order to prevent the second and third wives from making mistakes again, they should not stay in their hometown and bring trouble to the village, but should also go to Beijing to serve the old lady." How could the second and third wives follow the old lady to Beijing? Not only would they be controlled by their elder brother, but they would also be forced to serve the old lady every day. They would never agree to this. My husband did not let them do whatever they wanted in their hometown, but wrote a letter to the clan, asking the elders in the clan to come forward and watch whether the second and third wives were taking good care of the old lady. Now, the most promising person in the entire Sun family is Sun Jiaxing. Naturally, the Sun family dare not neglect his words, so the old lady's son was left in her hometown. Li, the eldest sister-in-law, no longer has to be tortured by her mother-in-law. Instead, she can write a letter to reprimand the second and third wives every now and then, urging them to take good care of the old lady with all their heart. Zhang Yuniang didn't expect things to turn out this way. She whispered, "Now you can finally see the moon after waiting for a long time." Li's mouth curled up. Now she has 2 children, her husband loves her, and even her annoying mother-in-law is thousands of miles away. The storybook she wrote was moved into the theater. There is really no better life than this. She tilted her head and looked at Nayunio, who was eating snacks very seriously with a loving expression. Nayunio noticed her godmother's gaze and reached out to Li to hold the peanuts in her hand. "Godmother, eat these peanuts quickly. Although they are not as good as Shu, my family's, they are also delicious." Nayuneo stroked her chest and thought to herself that it was a close call. She almost let it slip and said shuiying. Li didn't think much about it. She took the peanuts handed over by Nayuneo very graciously. When she saw the child, she suddenly remembered something and turned to Zhang Yuniang and said, "Sister-in-law, I have something that I would like to ask you for help." Zhang Yuniang nodded, "With our relationship, if there is anything, just tell me directly. It's the wife of my husband's colleague. She gave birth to a daughter a few days ago. I want you to meet her." Zhang Yuniang was puzzled when she heard this. People at that time paid attention to social circles. If you were not in that circle, it would be difficult to integrate into it. Li was the wife of Hanlin. Although she and Zhang Yuniang had a good relationship, their social circles were completely different. Zhang Yuniang was the wife of a Juren, and she didn't think she could integrate into it. Her situation is somewhat similar to mine, but her situation is worse than mine. If you can get some enlightenment and teach her some ways to keep fit, it would be great. After listening to Li's explanation, Zhang Yuniang probably understood that she wanted her to teach her some experience in postpartum conditioning. "Where is your colleague's wife's mother?" Zhang Yuniang asked. After all, according to common sense, postpartum care is usually passed down from mother to daughter, or there is an old and experienced nanny in a large family. Li sighed and said, "She is also a poor person. Her mother's family is rich, but her mother died early, and her stepmother didn't pay much attention to her. Although her father gave a large dowry, no one took care of these things for her. It's not easy for women, and they are even weaker after giving birth. I think it's a good thing to help." Zhang Yuniang didn't refuse after hearing this. While the few people were talking, the play on the stage was about to start, and Sun Jiaxing and manager Luo also walked in. Li's eyes were very sharp, and she saw something wrong at a glance. "Xiao, are you and manager Luo, is this a good thing coming?" Zhang Yuniang nodded gently. Li immediately said, "Then I will give her a big red envelope." With the sound of a gong, the stage became lively. The audiences in the audience also quieted down, and everyone stared at the stage intently, even Nayunia was staring at it. This story is very simple, and it is not complicated if you look at it in detail, but whether it was written by Li at the beginning or polished by Sun Jiaxing later, the words and sentences are very exquisite. Whenever Cheng He on the stage was unlucky, he would draw cheers from the audience. In the theater, in addition to the normal fruits and snacks, each table was given a plate of braised food. Although it looked out of place, the overbearing aroma of goose braised food made everyone salivate as soon as it entered their noses. "How do you do things? You only give a plate of food to a table. Are you feeding the birds?" "I have plenty of money, give me another big plate," a guest asked the theater waiter. The waiter explained pitifully, "Sir, we are a theater, we don't sell braised food. These on the table are sent by Fu Wang Braised Food Shop. One plate per table, we don't have more." "Fu Wang Braised Food Shop? Isn't this the one on the stage? Is there really such a shop?" the customer asked. In Guang'an County, the braised food shop was not called this name. Now the name was chosen by a master invited by shopkeeper Luo. Businessmen pursue auspicious and good-sounding names, and shopkeeper Luo likes the word Fu Wang very much. The waiter also received the reward from shopkeeper Luo in advance, so he naturally knew how to speak. Fu Wang Braised Food Shop now has a store in the north of the city, and will soon open stores in the east, south and west of the city. "Where do you live, sir?" "I live in the east of the city. The store on Yuanbao Street in the east of the city will open tomorrow, and the same braised food will be sold there." The guest was delighted when he heard this. "It's good that it's the same. My family lives next to Yuanbao Street." The waiter smiled and said, "If the braised food wasn't so delicious, it wouldn't have attracted the covetousness of villains like in the opera." The guest became interested again and asked, "The story sung on the stage is actually a true story?" "Of course, it's just that it didn't happen here, it's an old story from Guanglin Mansion. How could there be such a villain under the feet of the emperor? The guest was from Beijing, and he nodded when he heard this. The atmosphere under the feet of the emperor is naturally good. Guanglin Mansion? I vaguely remember that some wealthy family came from Guanglin Mansion, and I remember it. The Li family came from Guanglin Mansion. The Li family is the mother's family of concubine Li in the palace. Uncle Li is powerful in the court, and the waiter didn't dare to respond. When the play was finished, the whole hall cheered. I'm there, Nayuniu excitedly pulled Li's hand. Gu Mingda had thought that Nayuniu wouldn't be in the play, but he didn't expect that there was an actor squatting down and pretending to be a child. Li reached out and touched Nayuniu's nose. I can forget anyone, but I can't forget you, my dear. Old Mrs. Gu said seriously, the deer on the stage sings well, but he is not as lovable as our own deer. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 244. The play was a huge success, and Fu Wang Braised Meat Shop became an instant hit. Some bookstores also approached Sun Jiaxing and his wife to discuss publishing a book. Lu Xiru's marinade workshop also started to spin up, and she was so busy all day long that she was nowhere to be seen. However, the Gu family received another sum of money, which was the cost of the play. This money was not sent by the Sun family, but by shopkeeper Luo. Zhang Yuniang had no choice but to accept it, and gave the money directly to Lu Xiru, who paid it into the public account of the marinade workshop. Within 2 days, Mr. Li came to the door. Zhang Yuniang was just about to follow her out when she saw Niu Niu at the side with her eyes wide open and full of expectation. Take Niu Niu with you, she wants to go out to play Mrs. Li persuaded Zhang Yuniang. Zhang Yuniang refused, but said, it's not decent to bring a child to the house rashly. What Zhang Yuniang didn't say was that when a child came to the house, the host would give him a gift. She didn't want them to spend too much money. Li said, it's okay. She has long wanted to meet my goddaughter, so she brought Niu to the door, so that she would know how much pain my goddaughter causes. Niu was also there, grabbing her mother's sleeve. Mom, my godmother said it's okay, am I really not allowed to go out with you? How could Zhang Yuniang tolerate Niu's coquettish behavior, so she added some extra things to the gifts for her visit, and then she was willing to take Niu out. Sun Jiaxing's colleague was named Qian, and his wife also received a formal imperial decree from the court, so she was called Mrs. Qian. Mrs. Qian was only in her 20s. The child she gave birth to 5 days ago had a sallow complexion, which made people feel pity for her. Sister, this is Mrs. Gu I'm telling you about. She is extremely good at treating women. I originally had some problems, but after following her for treatment for a while on the way to Beijing, I'm fine now. When Mrs. Jian heard this, she immediately looked at Zhang Yuniang. I'm not a doctor. If you think about it carefully, I've been sick for a long time and have given birth to 3 children. I don't have any physical sequelae. Zhang Yuniang took the initiative to explain. She was also afraid that the other party had too high expectations. Sister, I am so lucky to have 3 children. I have been married for so many years and this is the only daughter I have, Mrs. Jian said with a hint of regret. Zhang Yuniang never felt that her daughter was inferior to her son, but she couldn't say it directly. She could only casually glance at the sleeping baby lying next to Mrs. Jian's bed and said, this child has delicate features and looks very much like you. When Mrs. Jian heard this, she lowered her head and looked at her daughter with tender eyes. Although he is not a boy, he is still a piece of flesh that has fallen from my body. As soon as I see her, I feel so soft-hearted. I just hope that she is safe and healthy. Niu also came over at this time. She looked at the cute baby, but she couldn't help but frown. Zhang Yuniang took the initiative to talk about how to take care of herself after giving birth, and MRSGN listened absently. "Madam, do you still have any doubts?" Zhang Yuniang asked proactively. Only then did MRSGN regain her energy and said, "MRSGU, you have raised several children, so you must be very good at taking care of them. Do you know of any way to make my daughter strong?" The child, less than 10 days old, was as thin as a kitten and felt light and airy in her arms. MRSGN could not find the mood to take care of her daughter in such a condition. "Madam, what does the doctor say?" Zhang Yuniang asked. "The child is too young, and the doctors don't dare to prescribe medicine, so I just let the good nurse take care of him. My nurse serves me with delicious food every day, but this child is getting thinner day by day. Until now, she is even thinner than before. She was even lighter when she was born." When MRSGN said this, tears actually fell down. MRS Lee hurriedly said, "Sister, please stop crying. Crying during confinement will hurt your eyes." MRSGN couldn't stop her tears and said, "My daughter is like this, what can I do?" Zhang Yuniang was now observing the child carefully, her brows getting tighter and tighter. "His face is sallow and his body is thin. He looks unhealthy no matter how he looks. Cousin, you should drink tonic soup." A beautiful girl of 17 or 18 years old came in carrying a tray. As soon as she saw MRSGN's red eyes, the girl scolded her softly, "Cousin, why are you crying again? Crying too much during confinement will hurt your health." The girl took out the handkerchief and gently wiped the tears on MRSGN's face. MRSGN quickly introduced the girl to MRS Lee and Zhang Yuniang. "This is the daughter of my mother-in-law's sister. Her surname is Liu, and her nickname is Ruyi." MRS Lee and Zhang Yuniang nodded lightly at the girl. MRSGN added, "This girl usually looks childish, but thanks to her taking care of me during this time." Liu Ruyi smiled shyly, and then urged MRSGN, "Cousin, you'd better drink this body-replenishing soup quickly. It will lose its medicinal properties when it cools down." MRSGN nodded helplessly and asked fondly, "Did you cook it yourself again?" "I have to keep an eye on my cousin's medicine in person before I can rest assured," Liu Ruyi explained. When everyone in the room heard this, they couldn't help but praise MRSGN for being so lucky to have such a good cousin. MRSGN couldn't help but said to her cousin, "There are so many servants in the family, why do you, the master, have to do it yourself?" Liu Ruyi didn't listen, but said with a smile, "Cousin, you have guests, so I won't interfere here. I'm going to watch the bodybuilding soup for the nannies." After Liu Ruyi left the house, MRSGN couldn't help but frown when she saw the bowl of soup. "And, don't you want to drink?" Niu Niu asked crisply. MRSGN also liked Niu Niu, who was as cute as a ball of snow, and explained, "The soup is too bitter. Every time Auntie drinks it, she can't help wanting to vomit it out." Niu Niu said, "Will it still work if you vomit it out?" MRSGN heard this and said, "So Auntie always swallows it with all her might." She explained again, "Drinking tonic soup is good for the body, and it's also the girl's kindness, I can't let her down." Niu Niu tilted her head and said innocently, "The soup is not tasty, you can ask the doctor to change it for a less bitter one's recipe. This is the secret recipe for nourishing the body handed down by the aunt who just came in. The recipe is not easily shown to others, and even the dregs of the medicine are buried personally. It has been used for generations. If we were not close, she would not give it to me." But Niu Niu said, "Although that aunt is very good to aunt, I am so afraid of her." When MRSGN heard this, she asked, "Why are you afraid of her? How did she bully Niu Niu?" Niu Niu shook her head gently, "I don't know, I'm just very scared." MRSGN thought it was a child talking nonsense. But Zhang Yuniang understood Niu Niu's specialness and became alert instantly. Seeing that MRSGN blew on the bowl of nourishing soup and was about to pour it into her mouth, Zhang Yuniang hurriedly stopped her and said, Don't rush to drink the medicine. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 245. When MRSGN heard this, she looked at Zhang Yuniang blankly. Can't I take tonics during confinement? Zhang Yuniang shook her head. She also understood the principle of not being intimate. You can take tonics, but you can't take them randomly. The medicinal properties of each tonic are different. Some are suitable for the elderly, and some are suitable for women who have just given birth. You should take them according to the situation. MRSGN immediately explained, cousin Ruyi's ancestors were imperial doctors, and her father is also a well-known local doctor. She said that this tonic is specially designed to treat postpartum qi and blood deficiency, so it should be right. After hearing this, Zhang Yuniang asked again. She said just now that she would continue to cook the medicine. Is it for the wet nurse? Is it the same recipe? MRSGN nodded and said, my cousin said this recipe can also help the wet nurse to expel milk. After hearing this, Zhang Yuniang frowned so much that she could kill a fly. MRSGN couldn't help but become nervous. Can't you eat like this? What do you think is wrong? Zhang Yuniang sighed and said, of course it is inappropriate. Do you know that the tonic taken by the nanny may enter the child's mouth through the milk? This was the first time MRSGN had heard about this, but she still didn't know what was wrong and asked, can't children eat it? Zhang Yuniang nodded, you hired a doctor earlier. The child is too young and the medicine is poisonous. The doctor dare not prescribe medicine to the child. How can you rashly let her take the same bodybuilding medicine as adults through breast milk? MRSGN's face changed drastically. Then I will quickly ask someone to stop the wet nurse. How long has the nanny been taking the tonic? Zhang Yuniang asked again. After MRSGN thought for a moment, she said, I have already taken it. I started eating it as soon as the child landed. My daughter is getting lighter and lighter as she grows. Is it because she takes tonics? However, Zhang Yuniang did not dare to vouch for it, but said, it's better to stop. It's best to ask a doctor again. Logically speaking, Miss Lu comes from a medical family and should understand this truth better than others. MRSGN nodded and added, although my cousin comes from a medical family, she is the daughter of a daughter who has not yet left the government. These things may not be clear. Zhang Yuniang followed this topic and continued to ask, speaking of which, why does Miss Lu live in the house? MRSGN's eyes were full of pity. My cousin's father unfortunately fell off the cliff and died while going up the mountain to collect medicine. Her mother was not in good health. She went there not long after hearing about this. They only have one daughter, my cousin. The Lu family wants to be extinct. My mother-in-law took pity on this girl and asked someone to take her to her and raise her. Zhang Yuniang asked again, it seems like you have a good relationship. MRSGN nodded and said, I have been married for many years, and now I have just given birth to a daughter. My mother-in-law has often been harsh on me for this. But since my cousin came, she has dealt with it for me. My mother-in-law has also been kinder to me. She is a good person, a good boy, not a difficult sister-in-law, who can understand other people's hardships. MRSGN was very grateful to Lu Ruyi when she thought about the past torture she had suffered from her mother-in-law's rules. Does your mother-in-law have any plans for her marriage? Zhang Yuniang asked again. When MRSGN heard this, a sad look appeared on her face. I think this girl is very good, and I wanted her to marry a brother from my mother's family, but my aunt thinks that this girl's parents are dead and she has no family to rely on. Not even willing to look at each other. But, fortunately, this girl is open-minded. She was anxious in the first 2 years, but this year it doesn't matter. I thought it would be a good idea to stay for 2 more years and slowly explore for her. If a girl's family gets married, her life will change. Find the right one. When Zhang Yuniang heard this, she couldn't help but feel a strange feeling in her heart. Are you not in a hurry, or do you already have a partner? MRSGN asked her maid to stop the nurse from drinking the medicine, but she picked up the bowl of soup again. Zhang Yuniang continued, the prescription is not static, but can be increased or decreased according to the physical condition. Madam, you have been taking the medicine for many days, have you ever felt any improvement? When MRSGN heard this, her expression paused, then she shook her head and said, it has not gotten better, but she feels a lot of discomfort in her body. She has trouble sleeping at night and is easily awakened by palpitations. After holding the child for a while, she feels weak and panicked. Zhang Yuniang said, in my personal opinion, I think your prescription needs to be changed. It's best to invite more doctors to come and consider it carefully together. Zhang Yuniang never directly said that Lu Ruyi had a problem from beginning to end, and she could only raise this point. After all, MRSGN was not the Li family, and they were not familiar with each other. If she talked too much, she would be suspected of sowing discord. MRSGN was a little troubled, it doesn't have to be like this. My cousin is not an outsider, so I can naturally trust her. Zhang Yuniang hurriedly said, it's not that I think Miss Liu's prescription is not good, it's just that she is not a real doctor, so she still needs to ask a real doctor to diagnose her pulse and adjust the prescription. Your health is not a trivial matter, and you don't have to think that you have to go through labor after giving birth. Closed. MRSGN couldn't understand Zhang Yuniang's words. Zhang Yuniang deliberately threatened her and said, there used to be a woman in the countryside who felt safe after giving birth. She also felt very weak, but her family was reluctant to ask a doctor to get her medicine. One night, the bleeding suddenly stopped, and when the doctor came, my body was cold. MRSGN, who was still in confinement, was so shocked that she turned pale when she heard this. Zhang Yuniang continued to give a strong dose of medicine. Not long after she left, her husband married another wife. It's a pity that the child she gave birth to with so much difficulty has a hard life under the stepmother. The little one has to do all the hard work at home. The stepmother will beat and scold him at any time if she is not satisfied. It's really pitiful. No mother with a child can listen to these words. MRSGN herself also lives under the stepmother. She understands the bitterness and pain of those years better than anyone else. She turned her head to look at her daughter who was still sleeping soundly, and said, okay, I will listen to you. I will ask a doctor in 2 days. Li said, that's right, you must not be afraid of illness and avoid medical treatment. We women have to take good care of our bodies for the children, if not for anything else. MRSGN nodded. Nayunia looked at MRSGN and then looked at her mother, her face full of hesitation. My dear, do you have anything to say? Li asked. Nayunia whispered, my father taught me a few days ago, how many tomorrows there are. Li couldn't help laughing when she heard this, but praised, my dear, you are really amazing. You remember everything your father taught you so clearly. Zhang Yuniang heard this and looked thoughtful. Then she took the initiative to say to Madame Jian, it's better to do it today than tomorrow. Otherwise, let's ask someone to call a doctor now. It's just right. I'll ask the doctor if there are some ways to take care of your body. Can I use them together for you? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 246. When MRSGN heard this, she didn't think much and said, why are you so anxious all of a sudden? Zhang Yuniang looked serious and advised, there is nothing minor about your health. The sooner you check your pulse, the better. Seeing her like this, MRSGN immediately called another personal maid to invite the doctor. But as soon as the doctor walked to the door, he met Lu Ruyi head on. Lu Ruyi, who was boiling medicine, received the news and ran to MRSGN. As soon as she entered the door, she complained, "Cousin, why are you so good? You have to stop the medicine for the nannies." "Did you hear what someone said?" MRSGN said, "It was only after listening to Madame Gu that I realized that the medicine taken by the wet nurse will flow into the child's mouth along with the milk." When Lu Ruyi heard this, she said, "There is no harm in the child taking the tonic." MRSGN frowned slightly and asked, "Do you know that children can take medicine through breast milk?" Lu Ruyi didn't think much and said, "My child is weak, so I just need this method to make up for it. I'm doing this for her own good." MRSGN's face was full of surprise and uncertainty at this time, but the doctor also said before that such a young child can only be taken care of well and cannot take medicine randomly. Lu Ruyi's eyes flashed and she said, when the doctor said this, maybe he felt that his medical skills were not good, and he was afraid that something would go wrong, so he didn't dare to prescribe medicine. When MRSGN heard this, she couldn't help but lower her head, wondering what she was thinking. Lu Ruyi didn't know that she had aroused MRSGN's alert, but continued to persuade, "Cousin, once you stop taking the medicine, all the medicine you took for so long will be in vain. You must not stop taking the medicine randomly." Lu Ruyi also noticed that the tonic soup for MRSGN had not been touched, and urged, "Cousin, why don't you take the medicine anymore? Good medicine is bitter, so don't ruin your body just because you can't take it bitterly." The more anxious she was, the weirder MRSGN felt. "Let it go for now, I'll drink it later," MRSGN said casually. Lu Ruyi couldn't just pour the medicine bowl into her cousin's mouth, so she could only repeat the same old story, "It's hard for such a young child to take supplements, so it can only be supplemented by the milk of the wet nurse. Cousin, you know me, I just hope that you and your child will be well, and I won't harm you randomly. Don't be so soft-hearted as to believe what others say." When Lu Ruyi said this, her eyes kept glancing at Zhang Yuniang, almost not directly saying that Zhang Yuniang was talking nonsense just to make money. Zhang Yuniang had never doubted Lu Ruyi before. After Niu Niu sent the signal, when she looked at Lu Ruyi again, she felt that there seemed to be something wrong with this girl. Lu Ruyi did not go out, but just stayed at home. She put makeup on her face, her hair was dressed carefully, and even the color of her clothes was carefully decorated. When Lu Ruyi spoke, her eyes were wandering, and she had been secretly looking at the furnishings in MRSGN's room, and occasionally she showed coveting. "You girl, what are you talking about? Am I the kind of person who follows the wind and rain? Don't worry, I know it all." When MRSGN said this, she glanced at Zhang Yuniang, for fear of making Zhang Yuniang unhappy. Zhang Yuniang smiled generously and said she didn't mind, and even added fuel to the dispute. "Miss Lu, if you can't trust ordinary doctors, you can also ask Mr. Qian to find a way to invite an imperial doctor to come to your home to diagnose your cousin's pulse." When Lu Ruyi heard this, a flash of anxiety flashed in her eyes, and she said, "My cousin is busy with official duties, how can you disturb him with such a trivial matter?" When MRSGN heard this, the smile on her face suddenly faded, and her eyes looking at Lu Ruyi were full of inquiry. She thought that Lu Ruyi liked her cousin-in-law very much, but the meaning reflected in these blurted words was intriguing. Lu Ruyi seemed to care more about her husband than her wife. MRSGN was relatively slow on other matters, but when her husband was involved, she immediately cheered up. "I haven't even asked your cousin yet, why are you so anxious first?" MRSGN asked deliberately. A look of guilt flashed across Lu Ruyi's face, but she quickly said, "I was having dinner at my aunt's place yesterday, and I heard my cousin complain. I know that I have been busy with official work recently and it is difficult to get away." When MRSGN heard this, she suddenly realized something. Since becoming pregnant, she and her husband have spent less time together, and they are not as sharp as before. Thinking about it now, Lu Ruyi dines with the old lady, and her husband goes to greet the old lady every day. The two of them meet almost every day. After all, it's hard to say that her husband sees Lu Ruyi more than he does. She thought again that Lu Ruyi seemed to be less anxious to find a husband this year than before. Is it because he had already found one? MRSGN forcibly suppressed the thoughts surging in her heart. She was wary of Lu Ruyi at this time, and saw that this girl's butt seemed to be fixed on the chair, as if she had no intention of leaving at all, which was delaying her conversation with Zhang Yuniang and the others. MRSGN thought for a while and said to Lu Ruyi, "I still remember the shredded chicken and ham soup you made. Now I am very greedy and thinking about it. That dish requires a lot of work and I can't follow it, just say it." MRSGN's words were so clear that Lu Ruyi could only smile reluctantly and said, "My cousin and I are too outspoken. If you want to eat, just tell me." MRSGN picked her up again and deliberately said to Zhang Yuniang and MRS Li, "Look at this girl, she is so kind to me. As soon as I said she wanted to eat, she wanted to go to the kitchen and cook it for me right now, for fear of I can't eat it." A hint of darkness flashed across Lu Ruyi's eyes, but she still stood up and said, "Cousin, I'll go to the kitchen now." After Lu Ruyi left, Madame Qian immediately told the maid, "Go and get the dregs of the medicine for me and the nurse." Lu Ruyi was in a hurry to come here, and the dregs were not picked up in time, so the maid took them casually. Not long after, the doctor who had been invited came. Madam said in a hurry, "So I only had time to invite Dr. Zhang," the personal maid explained. The last time Madame Qian was treated, it was Dr. Zhang, and they were very familiar with each other. But Dr. Zhang frowned more and more when he felt the pulse. The people in the room also became worried. "Doctor, is there something wrong with our madam?" the personal maid asked anxiously. Dr. Zhang shook his head and asked about Madame Qian's diet and daily life. Strange, from what Madame said, she didn't eat anything she shouldn't have. Could it be that she worked too hard during the confinement period? That's why she is now suffering from a great loss of qi and blood. When Madame Qian heard this, her face turned pale. "Do I have any signs of hemorrhage?" Madame Qian was afraid that she would be like the woman in Zhang Yuniang's story. The doctor looked embarrassed and said, "If Madame continues to lose blood, it's hard to say." Madame Qian's body was shaky. Zhang Yuniang took the medicine that she hadn't drunk and asked the doctor, "Do you think there is anything wrong with this tonic medicine?" The doctor picked up the bowl of medicine and saw the dregs of the medicine, and his face suddenly changed. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 247. Who on earth thought of giving these decoctions to postpartum women? Dr. Zhang asked with a frown. MRSGN suddenly felt cold. Is it because these tonics are causing me to lose money? The child's wet nurse is also drinking these decoctions. Will it affect my son? Dr. Zhang opened his eyes wide and said, "Tonic medicine? Where can I get this medicine? It's completely poisonous to people's lives. You take these soups every day, no wonder you are getting weaker and weaker. If you continue to drink like this, you won't be able to give birth to a baby. My life is going to be lost." When MRSGN heard this, she immediately trembled like chaff. What she cared about most was not herself, but her child. My daughter also took the tonic decoction through the nurse's milk. Stop it quickly. If you drink more, you mother and daughter can stay together in the underworld." Dr. Zhang blew his beard and glared. MRSGN's whole body collapsed, and her eyes were blank at this moment. Why did she do this to me? When Dr. Zhang heard this, he wanted to cover his ears on the spot and said, "Madam, don't tell me too much about your affairs in the inner house. I will give you some dietary supplements for your body." MRSGN immediately asked, "What about my daughter? I am the only child." Dr. Zhang said, "Ask the wet nurse to eat with you." MRSGN breathed a sigh of relief and finally sent Dr. Zhang away. She immediately whispered to her personal maid to continue looking for other doctors. In fact, once she was bitten by a snake, MRSGN would not just listen to one person's words now. She would have to find a few more people before she could feel relieved. Zhang Yuniang witnessed a secret affair in the house. At this moment, she felt uneasy and turned to look at Mr. Li. Li nodded gently toward her, and then moved with ease. Mrs. Li first took out the handkerchief, squeezed out a few tears in the shortest possible time, and said to MRSGN, "I thought you were lucky, but I didn't expect that we have the same fate." No one likes to be laughed at by the wives of his colleagues. What Li is doing now is to close the relationship between himself and MRSGN. If he can completely become his own person, he will definitely not be resented by her and look at her secretly. The best way to get closer is to share a common secret, or to be deeply involved in the other person's secret. Mrs. Li didn't say much about her own affairs, but acted like she was for the sake of money and quickly helped with suggestions. This girl Lu Ruyi has bad intentions. Now that you know about it, have you thought about how to deal with it? Li asked. MRSGN said, "What else can we do? Naturally, we should tell my husband-in-law and mother-in-law and let them handle it." Mrs. Li immediately said, "Your husband-in-law will definitely be on your side, but that may not be the case with your mother-in-law. You have to think clearly." Mrs. Li knew that women couldn't bear to hear that their husbands didn't take her to heart, so she said this deliberately. "Sure enough," MRSGN said, "it is true that my mother-in-law loves that bitch. Even if this matter breaks out, she will probably still protect her." Ms. Li continued, "Even if your husband-in-law is on your side and your mother-in-law makes a fuss, what will happen to him?" MRSGN looked grim and asked, "Sister Li, what should I do?" Li said, "You still can't come forward to deal with this matter yourself, but let your husband-in-law handle it." "But my husband, you just said that he can't stand my mother-in-law's troubles," MRSGN said. Mrs. Li sighed and said, "Then think of a way to stop your mother-in-law from making trouble. Think about what is most important to your mother-in-law, of course your husband-in-law." MRSGN looked at Mr. Li stupidly, her eyes full of pure confusion. "But this matter has nothing to do with my husband-in-law." MRSGN was very puzzled. Her husband-in-law actually didn't like her daughter much, so it was difficult for her to connect the two things. Ms. Li is no longer the Ms. Li she used to be. She has already opened her mind now. "My cousin plotted to fill my cousin's house, so she murdered my cousin-in-law. With such a scandal happening in the inner house, do you still want your husband-in-law's official title?" Ms. Li asked in a low voice. MRSGN's eyes suddenly lit up. "Sister, you still have a way. If you hadn't brought MRS Gu here today, I might have been killed inexplicably." Mrs. Li also knew MRSGN's worries, clapped her hand and said, "Don't worry, Madame Gu is a trustworthy person and won't talk nonsense. As long as your husband-in-law takes care of his cousin, no one will dare to use this to threaten his career." MRSGN was now very convinced of Mrs. Li. She looked at Nyuniu's side and saw that the little girl was far away. She was concentrating on playing with a set of ornaments on the table. She probably didn't even understand what the adults were talking about. At this time, I was completely relieved. "Sister, I will listen to you," Mrs. Li said with a sincere expression. "For us women, taking good care of our bodies and living a long life are the most important things. If you don't think about yourself, you should also think about your children." MRSGN nodded vigorously. She had suffered from her stepmother herself, and she would definitely not want her daughter to suffer again. Mrs. Li gave Zhang Yuniang another look. Zhang Yuniang hurriedly said, "MRSGN, women are weak and there are many things that need to be paid attention to in maintaining the body. Please listen to me and tell you in detail." Zhang Yuniang did not tell MRSGN any oral method, but asked her to move more. MRSGN was extremely cautious about what she put in her mouth when the wind was blowing. What Zhang Yuniang taught her was really to her liking. Finally, Zhang Yuniang added, "My youngest son is now learning medical skills from an old lady. I once heard the old lady say that not only the decoctions you take, but also the medicinal materials you brew and take. You can't just eat it by yourself, you have to ask a doctor." MRSGN nodded vigorously. After Zhang Yuniang and her party left, other doctors who had been sent to invite them also arrived. After looking at the dregs of the medicine, they came to the same conclusion as Dr. Zhang, and the regimen for MRSGN's health was also similar. MRSGN explained in detail the healthcare methods taught by Zhang Yuniang. These methods can indeed strengthen the body. As long as you stick to it, madam, your physique will definitely become stronger. Almost all doctors have affirmed these health-preserving methods taught by Zhang Yuniang. But at the same time, almost all doctors concluded that it would be difficult for MRSGN to get pregnant again because of this loss. Is there really no other way? MRSGN asked bitterly. The other doctors all shook their heads, but only one young doctor became an honest man. "Madam, your body is already in such a bad state. Even if you are really pregnant, it would not be a good thing. The mother is weak. If both mother and child die." MRSGN suddenly turned pale with horror. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 248. After all the doctors left, it was unknown how long it had passed. Madame Qian fell asleep thinking about Zhang Yuniang's words that she should rest more during the confinement period. Madame Qian had a dream. There was no Zhang Yuniang and Nai Yuniu in the dream. Li only came when she took her third bath. She continued to eat tonic soup without knowing it, and suddenly had a hemorrhage before she was out of the confinement period. When her daughter was 2 or 3 months old, she died because of a high fever and was not treated in time. A year after her death, her husband remarried Lu Ruyi. The couple loved and lived in harmony, and soon forgot about her old lover. Madame Qian woke up from the nightmare. It was clearly broad daylight, but she was scared and sweating. When she thought of the death of both mother and daughter in the dream, she was full of resentment. "Madam, please eat something. Your body is important. Even if you can't eat, you have to eat. Madame Gu said that you have to take care of your body. Think more about the young lady," the personal maid advised softly. MRSGN lost her appetite due to the nightmare, but she could hear the crying of a child and the sound of the nurse humming a ballad to comfort the child. MRSGN slowly came back to her senses. She looked at the maid beside her, and after a long time, she finally made a decision: "Tomorrow you go to the human traffickers to buy a girl yourself. You must choose a girl with a kind temperament and a pretty appearance. Don't choose the kind of girl who hides evil inside. Forget it, buy more, at least pick 2. MRSGN suffered too many shocks today, and the whole person was like being poured with a basin of cold water, from head to toe. Although everyone around her told her that her husband respected and loved her very much, and her husband in the dream seemed to be nothing unusual, and even kept filial piety for her for a year. But MRSGN didn't dare to gamble. She was born in a wealthy merchant family. In the past, because of her rich dowry, her husband loved her a lot, but after her husband passed the imperial examination and became an official, even her father had to be cautious when talking to her husband. She knew better than anyone how much her husband hoped for a son. Instead of the couple being separated in the future, it would be better to give him a concubine now. Lord Qian came back in the evening. He went to the old lady in the backyard first, had dinner, and then came to the main room. Because Madame Qian kept it a secret, the inner house was full of her dowry servants. Lu Ruyi didn't know that she had been exposed. Instead, she instigated the old lady to accuse Madame Qian of wasting money by hiring a bunch of doctors in front of Lord Qian. "Madam, Are you feeling unwell today? Lord Qian asked about Madame Qian's doctor. Madame Qian immediately broke the big news today. Lord Qian was just asking for routine questions and was not prepared to accept this big news. I won't let my cousin cook soup for you in the future. She may not know the inside story and is confused. Lord Qian's first reaction was to smooth things over. After all, Madame Qian is not dead now, and the old lady has always loved Lu Ruyi. Although Madame Qian was mentally prepared, she still felt a chill on her back at this time. She took his official reputation as taught by Li. Without any hesitation, Lord Qian changed his words on the spot. You are right. Such a vicious woman must not stay with my mother. Tomorrow I will find someone to send her back to her hometown and hand her over to the Lu family to deal with her. The Lu family swallowed up Lu Ruyi's property. They were a group of jackals and tigers. If she went back now, it would be like a sheep entering a tiger's mouth. The end can be imagined. MRSGN suddenly figured it out. Whether it was herself, Lu Ruyi, or even her own mother in the backyard, in the eyes of her husband, they might not be as important as his career. When MRSGN thought of this, she suddenly felt that what she was going to say didn't seem so painful. I'm not feeling well now, so I want to take 2 concubines for you, what do you think? Mr. Qian was stunned when he heard this, and after a moment he said, Madam, you just have to make the decision on matters in the back house. Although Madame Qian had expected this reaction, she was still disappointed. She told herself that she would only treat her husband as a tool to seek wealth and honor for her daughter in the future, and not to give her true heart anymore. After Zhang Yuniang and her group left the Qian mansion, they boarded the carriage. Na Yuniu looked at the unhappy faces of the 2 mothers and asked in confusion, why are you unhappy? Zhang Yuniang didn't know what to say for a while. It was not easy to tell Na Yuniu directly about the secrets of the inner house. Na Yuniu held up a set of jade ornaments in the shape of small animals in her hand and said, Mom, Aunt Qian is so kind. This is what she gave me. Madame Qian saw Na Yuniu playing with the ornaments all the time, and thought she liked them, so she gave them directly to Na Yuniu. Not only the set of ornaments, she also gave many gifts to thank Zhang Yuniang for saving her life. Zhang Yuniang still felt uneasy and asked Li, did I say something wrong before? Although I saved Madame Qian, will it be a burden to you? Li shook her head and said, don't worry, she is not that kind of person. There are too many secrets in the inner house. Even if it is spread out, it is just a few gossips. Madame Qian knows the difference between the important and the unimportant. Besides, if you really want to say it is a burden, it is me who is a burden to you. I originally thought that I could not only solve Madame Qian's urgent needs, but also let you show your strengths, but I didn't expect that the first move would involve the secrets of the inner house. Although Li didn't say it clearly, Zhang Yuniang understood that Li did this to let Zhang Yuniang take more gifts of thanks. This time she went to Madame Qian's house. Not counting the jade ornaments in Na Yuniu's hand, the other gifts were worth 200 or 300 taels of silver. She only spent a whole morning and said a few words there and gained so much, which shows how easy it is to make money from these ladies. Zhang Yuniang couldn't help but sighed when she thought of this, and said, I used to think that women who lived in a big house and were served by a bunch of maids and servants had no worries. Now I think that family harmony seems to be more important than more money. Li nodded with deep feeling. Na Yuniu raised her little face and said, so what mother did today was to help Aunt Qian's family harmony. You are so great. Zhang Yuniang didn't expect that her daughter in the praise group could find a tricky reason to praise herself. She hurriedly explained, my dear, mother didn't help your Aunt Qian's family harmony today. What mother did today was to help your Aunt Qian get well. Zhang Yuniang thought that she should not do such things in the future. No, Na Yuniu was puzzled. Zhang Yuniang was about to nod. Li said, yes, you did help her in this way. Zhang Yuniang was full of doubts. Li continued, I know you're thinking of quitting because of what happened today, but think about it carefully. MRSGN has thought it through and is clear-headed. She will naturally know how to handle family affairs in the future. Isn't that a harmonious family? Her situation at home has also become better. Not to mention, you really saved the lives of MRSGN and her daughter. Nayuniu immediately followed Li and said loudly, Mom saved 2 lives. Mom is a great hero. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 249. Zhang Yuniang could stand other things, but she couldn't stand her daughter's praise. The little girl spoke softly and delicately, which made Zhang Yuniang unable to help but want to get excited and want to continue doing this. Ms. Li advised from the side, staying at home all day long will inevitably lead to a lack of information. If you go out more and move around, people will be more active. You will learn more about things and your horizons will be broader. Niu kept nodding, grabbing Zhang Yuniang and continuing to act coquettishly. Yes, mother, it's so boring for you to be stuck at home all day long. You can get to know more aunties when you go out. Zhang Yuniang's considerations were different from theirs. She thought of her second son. If they can really make friends with these dignitaries, they might be able to help their second son one day. Okay, since you all think it is feasible to do this, then I will continue. Li Shi said with a smile, that's right. After I came to the capital, I just realized a truth. Only when our daughter's family comes out can we see the vastness of the world. If we are trapped in the inner house all day long, we are not just allowed to be slaughtered. Lamb. Mrs. Li also felt this. During those years, she was trapped in the deep courtyard of her hometown. It was not like her eyes were black and she could only let her mother-in-law and sister-in-law bully her. After returning to the Gu family's house, she told Gu Mingda about the matter. Gu Mingda agreed very much. Not for the sake of his second son, Gu Mingda just felt that although Zhang Yuniang said she was afraid of getting involved in the secrets of the inner house, the light in her eyes could not deceive anyone. Zhang Yuniang looked in high spirits. It was obvious that she was still proud of what she was doing, and she could get recognition from this incident. Niu pulled Gu Mingda's sleeve, whispered into her father's ear, Mom seems to be more beautiful. Gu Mingda couldn't help laughing when he heard this. What did you two, father and daughter, say behind my back? Zhang Yuniang said angrily. Niu rolled her eyes and said slyly, I won't tell Mom, this is a little secret between me and Dad. Gu Mingda nodded vigorously. Zhang Yuniang pretended to be jealous, okay, Niu has the best relationship with your father now. When Niu heard this, she immediately became anxious and hurriedly threw herself into her mother's arms and said, No, my mother and I are always the best, we are the best. Zhang Yuniang couldn't help but laugh, tapped Niu's forehead, and then took the milky little girl into her arms. Mother Yun, if you really want to help those women, you can actually ask Dr. Yan for advice. He has been practicing medicine for many years and must have a lot of experience. You can also learn a thing or two, Gu Mingda said. Zhang Yuniang actually listened to the suggestion and said, I will ask him for advice when I have some free time. Gu Mingda helped his wife think of a goal. When you have experienced many things in the future, maybe you can compile them into a volume and write a book. Zhang Yuniang was not as confident as him, and said, How can I, a woman, have such ability? Neither Gu Mingda nor Niu allowed her to belittle herself. Niu said, Mom is the most powerful person. Gu Mingda also said, What about women? Aren't men and women all human beings? I never think that women can't do things that men can do. Yun Niang, I always think that you are just a pity as a daughter. If you go to school like me, you might be able to pass the imperial examination faster than me. Zhang Yuniang said with a smile, I'm not that powerful. It's all because you favor me that you think so highly of me. I'm just an ordinary woman. Niu Niu retorted loudly, Mom is not an ordinary person. She can take care of us and do business. Everyone likes me. She is the best. Gu Mingdan nodded and said, yes, your mother is so amazing. Unlike your father, who is busy while studying and has no ability to take care of you. Na Yuniu put her little face against Zhang Yuniang's face, when I grow up, I want to be as powerful as my mother. Gu Mingda added, there are many things in the inner house that cannot be explained clearly. You did a good job today. Use verbal hints to guide them to think for themselves, and say more words of comfort. Sickness is mostly caused by emotions, which can help them relax. It's not like returning without success. Zhang Yuniang was originally a little anxious, but she gradually calmed down with the comfort from her father and daughter. Gu Mingda, on the other hand, was still thinking about Xuying. Even though Zhang Yuniang mentioned that Xuying was very loyal to Na Yuniu, this girl was so crazy that he could never completely let go of her without seeing her. When Xuying saw Gu Mingda and Niu Niu coming together, she could only see Niu Niu in her eyes. Miss Third, look at the soap I made for you. Use this to wash your hands and bathe. It will be quick and clean. Xuying held a piece of light yellow paste cut into squares in front of Niu Niu like a treasure. Na Yuniu's hands happened to be dirty, so Xuying held her hand and showed her how to wash her hands in the basin nearby. Seeing her hands making a bunch of foam, Niu Niu felt it was extremely novel. This time I only made ordinary soap. I went back to pick the flowers and make floral soap. Our third lady will always smell good, Xuying said happily. Gu Mingda was originally on guard, but when he saw Xuying touching Na Yuniu with a cautious attitude, as if he was touching a fairy, Gu Mingda suddenly felt that his guarding was a bit ridiculous. But after listening to Xuying's words and seeing the effect of soap with his own eyes, he immediately understood that there was a huge business opportunity in it. Lard is not a cheap item for ordinary people's homes, and soap made from lard is destined not to enter ordinary people's homes. But to achieve the purpose of cleaning, for dignitaries, price has never been an issue. If you really add floral fragrance to it, as Xuying said, then you won't have to worry about selling it. Gu Mingda had a lot of thoughts in his heart, but he looked down at Na Yuniu and Xuying. The two were having fun together at this time. Xuying followed Na Yuniu in everything and put Na Yuniu's wishes first. Gu Mingda suddenly felt that all his thoughts on making money were despicable. Xuying took out another jar of white sugar. Miss Third, this is the white sugar I made. Take a bite. Xuying scooped a spoonful and gave it to Niu Niu. Niu Niu slurped it into her mouth, and soon her eyes lit up. It's delicious, so sweet. I want to eat it again. Na Yuniu is only 6 years old. No child can withstand the temptation of sugar. This time, Xuying rarely obeyed her, but said hesitantly, my tooth hurts if I eat too much. I can't eat too much. Niu Niu sighed heavily and lowered her head with a look of disappointment. When Xuying saw the little girl like this, she was as anxious as an ant on a hot pot and said, do you have anything else you want to eat? I'll make it for you right now. Do you want to eat pork jerky? Or something else? Yes. Shall I make fried chicken legs for you? The way she looked at this time, she really wanted to give her heart to Niu Niu. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 250. Niu Niu glanced at Gu Mingda secretly and whispered, my parents don't let me eat too many snacks, because they are afraid that I will accumulate food. Xuying said, okay, Miss Third's health is the most important thing. Although Na Yuniu is well behaved and sensible, she will inevitably feel disappointed if she doesn't eat enough. Xuying added, but Third Miss also wants to make friends. I made delicious snacks and third miss brought them to other children to play with. Everyone was happy to play with third miss and praised third miss as a child who is willing to share. Niu Niu was really happy when she heard these words to coax the child, and said, when sharing with others, I can also eat, I don't eat too much, just eat a little bit. Only Gu Mingde was unhappy because her daughter ate too many snacks and had less food in her stomach. Before Gu Mingde took the initiative to mention the soap, Xu Ying asked, Miss Third, are you short of money? Or, how about taking the soap prescription to exchange for money? Niu Niu shook her head and said proudly, I am not short of money, I am very rich. My family's workshop will give me 40% of the shares. I am the richest person in the family. After Xuying heard this, she was very happy for her and said, if your family is willing to give you money, you really care about the lady. Those families who are unwilling to give money to the girl at home are not sincere. When Niu heard this, she became a little unhappy and said, I have told you so many times that my family cares about me. Why don't you believe me? Xuying lowered her head and curled her lips and said, it's not like I have never encountered such a bad family. They are always picky and partial, just waiting to take advantage of the girl. This was the first time Gu Mingde heard the title of Empress. This girl was indeed the same as his wife said, her speech was disordered and she was delirious. Princess, the more money, the better. With more money, you will have the confidence to do anything in the future. When you come back, ask someone to bring me a pen and paper, and I will write the recipe to you, Xuying still said, trying to persuade Niu to accept the money. Niu was very unhappy and said, this is your prescription, and the money after selling it is also yours. Xuying said, I am your maid, everything about me is yours. Niu said almost without thinking, you are also a human being, everyone is equal, and what is yours is yours. After she said this, Gu Mingde on the side was stunned for a moment, and then hurriedly said, Niu, you can't say this nonsense. Niu turned her head and looked at Gu Mingde blankly. Although it is said that princes who break the law are as guilty as the common people, this is never the case. It's okay to say everyone is equal at home. If you go out and let the nobles hear it, I'm afraid they will cause trouble for you. When Gu Mingde said this, he didn't feel relaxed. No father was willing to teach his children the dark side of the world. But if we don't teach, we are afraid that our children will get hurt. Niu nodded, Dad, don't worry, I won't say it, but what does it mean that everyone is equal? Why did I blurt it out? The confusion on Niu's face didn't look like she was faking it, it was like she had learned the words without even realizing it. Gu Mingde felt that her daughter's appearance at this time was very distressing. If you don't understand it, forget about it. We forgot about it, and it's hard for Dad to explain it to you in detail, Gu Mingde explained patiently. Xuying on the side suddenly burst into tears and said, I remember everything. I remember everything I told you. I have always been in your heart. Gu Mingde didn't expect Xuying to jump out and take the matter on him. Can he really believe what the crazy girl said? Where did you hear the sentence? Gu Mingde tried to trace the source. But Xuying was on guard, don't try to trick me. I will only tell the queen about my affairs. Gu Mingde. Niu said again, don't be mean to my father. Xuying still changed her face at the speed of light, Master Ninth, you are so great, don't argue with me. When Gu Mingde heard this, he felt strange. Although the other party was apologizing, how could he say this in such an uncomfortable way? After Xuying apologized perfunctorily, she said to Niu, I have no use for money. My money is your mother's money. If your mother thinks this recipe is too eye-catching, I will write some food recipes and you can sell them to the restaurant. Get money to buy something you like. Miss Third, your body is delicate, and any thicker fabric will leave red marks on your body. I feel so uncomfortable when I think that you are not dressed as decently as others. Gu Mingda couldn't help but glance at Niu Niu. The little girl was wearing new clothes made this year. They were made of good quality fabrics. What was wrong with them? But Xiuying continued, you also have a plain head. Niu Niu retorted, I have a lot of jewelry, but I just don't like wearing it. It's too heavy. Both Li and Lu Xiru like to dress up Niu Niu, so in fact Niu Niu has the most clothes and jewelry in the family. Seeing that she couldn't talk to her, Xiuying simply stopped pretending, as if she was cheating, I just want to give you this recipe, and I just want you to have a lot of money. Just think of it as a gift, between friends. We should give each other gifts. I gave you this, and I hope you will bring me a milk-producing sheep next time. Although Niu Niu is young, she has the aura of being rich and not being lascivious. She said, I don't want it now. I'll wait until when I want it. Xiuying immediately slapped the snake on the stick and said, then I'll write it down first, and you can keep it so it's convenient for you to use it whenever you need it. Niu Niu frowned. Xiuying's eyes flickered, and she said, you know I'm crazy, what if I forget it at any time? I have to write it down first. Niu Niu couldn't find any reason to refute for a while, so she could only pinch her nose and admit it. After Xiuying got the pen and ink, she wrote many prescriptions without stopping. Gu Mingda just took a look and felt frightened. This crazy girl not only wrote the method of making sugar, but also the method of making salt. There is even a method of smelting iron. This punishment is really too much. The crazy girl is really crazy. Salt and iron are originally controlled by the state, and all are made by the government. The crime related to salt is still lighter, but if it is related to iron, as long as it is exposed, I'm afraid that all 9 clans will be in front of him. Gu Mingda sighed, picked up the paper with salt making and iron smelting written on it, looked at it several times, wrote down the content, and then tore up the 2 papers. I've written it down. I'll tell Niu Niu when she needs it, Gu Mingda promised Xiuying. Xiuying was still on guard, you can't embezzle it. This is the capital for the queen to make a comeback in the future. Gu Mingda almost fell to the ground when he heard this. What does this crazy girl mean? What do you mean by making a comeback? Is she really planning to let Niu Niu raise the flag of rebellion?